Hey, what's up, GITV? My name is Tim, and I am here with
Head Tech Frank.
Head Tech Frank. And as you can see, we have two very similar looking guns in front of us, but they're actually pretty different. I have a G&G Combat Machine, and Frank has a G&G Top Tech. Now, there's a common misconception out there that the Top Tech is just a combat machine with a metal body, but that couldn't be further from the truth, and that's why we've broken up the guns here, and we actually have complete guns in front of us so we can go over the major differences between them. Most notably, the bodies. The combat machines have a polymer body, but Frank, your gun has a full metal body.
Yeah, that's correct. So even if the Top Tech was just a combat machine with a metal body, the price difference actually just does justify the metal body, because I mean metal bodies go for at least $100.
Yeah.
I mean that's just for a good one. I mean there are cheaper ones, but
yeah. So even if the only difference was the metal body, I mean if you had a plastic gun that you wanted to buy a metal body for anyway, you'd be spending at least $100. I know my metal body on one of my guns cost me about $150, and there are even more expensive metal bodies out there in the $200+ range.
I think the most I paid was $200.
Yeah, definitely. I have a Hurricane HK metal body on one of my M4s. That was about $200 as well. But, you know, your gun has a metal body. My gun has a plastic body. My gun also has a multi-piece outer barrel, which is pretty solid, but it is susceptible to becoming wobbly, whereas your gun, Frank, has a one-piece solid outer barrel, which is going to be much, much more sturdy and last a lot longer.
That's correct.
As far as the externals go, those are the major differences, okay? We've got the same pistol grip. You know, orange flash hider is pretty standard. You know, everything else is very, very close together. But there are some major differences on the internals of our guns. Most notably, the spring guide and the piston head. I have a standard spring guide in my gun and a standard polymer piston head, whereas Frank, your piston head and spring guide have ball bearings on it. And why don't you tell people why that's important?
Okay, so obviously, as you can see, there's ball bearings on the spring guide, and you cannot see the ball bearings inside the, the piston for the cylinder head. But as the spring is compressing and decompressing, it's going to want to twist. So the ball bearings are there just to kind of relieve some of the stress. Without them, you'll actually possibly snap your spring, but you'll definitely wear the spring out a lot faster.
Believe it or not, springs are a wear and tear item on your gun. I know I have personally snapped a spring in half in one of my guns, and that's because the old TM piston head design actually locks the spring into it.
That's correct.
Yeah, so the ball bearing upgrades on those parts is really, really helpful. Some of the differences, I have an aluminum cylinder, a really lightweight cylinder, versus your brass cylinder, and I have an aluminum internal barrel versus your brass barrel. Some people may not understand why the material is better. What is your explanation?
I mean, as far as the barrels are concerned, personally, I like to use inner barrels that are a little bit heavier, so a denser material like brass or even like the steel ones that Prometheus makes. Basically, when you shoot the gun, the gearbox does make vibrations, and the vibrations can potentially translate into the barrel. You don't want a vibrating barrel with a BB flying down it. You know, with
accuracy.
Exactly. It's going to affect the accuracy.
So it's not that the aluminum barrel in the combat machine is bad, it's just that the better one is better for better performance. Other than that, there are a couple of other miscellaneous gearbox components that are different, such as I have brass bushings, you have ball bearing bushings.
Right, and these are 8mm in size. So obviously the bearings are going to run a lot smoother, and it's going to require less amp draw to get the gearbox running.
Yeah, but other than that, all of our stuff is pretty similar. We have the same gear set, same motor, same piston, you know, with the second to last tooth missing. But there are even more differences still. It's really the little things that G&G does right with the Top Tech that aren't bad on the combat machine, but because this is the economy model, they're just not as good. You want to go into some of those differences, Frank?
Yeah, so obviously the differences now we're looking at is material and the way things are made. So let's just take a look at the
magazine
catch.
release. Yeah,
exactly. Yours is a pot metal, one piece.
The quality of the metal isn't as high quality. It certainly functions, and this is the TM style mag catch where the screw actually goes into it. Your mag catch is much better made out of a higher quality steel. Right, and it's also the real gun style mag catch where the button, or I guess the release, actually twists into the button.
Right, so you know, in Airsoft, our goal is to get as realistic as we possibly can.
So having a steel mag catch is definitely one of those minute features that G&G does right with the Top Tech. Another thing that's steel on Frank's gun that's not steel, probably has a lot more zinc in it is the trigger component. Now I can tell the trigger obviously works, you know, it uses the shuttle and it's going to operate the gun just fine, but your steel trigger definitely looks nicer and it's just more realistic.
And oddly enough, Tim, there have been times where we get repairs in where the triggers actually break.
Okay.
So it is a part that could potentially break. So obviously the stronger material is going to last a lot longer.
Indeed. Now there's one more major difference between the two guns that I want to make sure we cover, and that's the fact, and this is relatively new, G&G is offering Top Tech guns with Dean's connectors. They also have, as you can see, a little adapter here if you happen to have a Tamiya battery. And this is something relatively new. They have it on the M4a1 and they're going to start doing it for more Top Tech guns in the future. But why don't you explain, Frank, why Dean's connectors are better than traditional Tamiya ones?
Okay, so the Dean's connectors, it's a thicker connection, so you're gonna get less, kind of like less resistance.
Less resistance, better connectivity.
Exactly, when you kind of plug them in together. The other nice thing about these is when you're playing extended games and you have extended periods of full auto fire, your wires, your connectors, they all tend to heat up. Now, I think we've all gone through it at one point or another where we melt our Tamiya connectors. Nothing wrong with the gun, it just got so hot it melted.
It happens.
Yeah, it does. That won't happen with the Dean's connectors.
Dean's are more thermal resistant, as you can say. And another thing that I like about Dean's connectors, some people might say that I'm complaining or this is a first world problem or something like that, but the Dean's connectors are just easier to connect and disconnect. Sometimes the pins on the Tamiya connector just don't meet up properly, or this little tab on the male end just doesn't go over the female tab. And you know, it takes a few seconds, it's kind of a pain in the ass, but the Dean's connectors certainly make life a lot easier and they perform better, as Frank said, so I think it's a really neat upgrade.
Definitely not a weird complaint. You know, you go to plug your battery in, the game starts, and you go to pull the trigger and nothing happens. Yeah, you go in, you're checking your connectors, you find out that, you know, one of the pins came out of place.
Yeah, because a lot of times the connector will be in, but the wire will be out. So, you know, it's just one of those quirky things that you won't run into with a Dean's connector. And it's like a $5 upgrade if you wanted to buy a Dean's connector and then put it on your gun that has a Tamiya. So it's really neat that G&G is offering that from the factory. And for those of you that don't convert to Dean's, they do have the adapter. And I think we've pretty much covered the differences between the two guns.
Just one more, looking at it. If you pick up your buffer tube, you know, we're going back to realism. If you take a look at mine,
there you go.
You just got a one-piece buffer tube there.
Okay, so for those of you that are unaware,
castle nut on the back of it.
That castle nut is how a real gun's buffer tube would attach to the M4.
Right, it would actually, that's like the lock nut. Yeah.
So yeah, there you go. I mean, the Top Tech is more realistic in material and function. Internally, it features better components. Externally, it features better components as well, and so it's just made better, and that's where the difference in price comes in. That's not to say the combat machine's not a bad gun. This is one of the best-selling guns that we have, and this has been proven to function really well, and that's why that we sell so many of them. But just to show you the differences between G&G's top-of-the-line gun and G&G's economy-line gun.
But I mean, if this one functions well and this one's upgraded, it obviously needs to function a lot better, right?
Of course, and it does, and you know the parts that we've shown prove that. One thing that I want to mention in this video before I let you go, Frank, is the warranties. Now, prior to September of this year, 2012, the Top Tech guns came with a 2-year manufacturer's warranty. That is a really long warranty. But after September of this year, they're reducing that down to 90 days, and that's really not a knock or anything on that because G&G receives so few Top Techs back anyway. That's not really going to hurt anything, and 90 days is still 3 months long. It's a long warranty, and so the 90-day warranty for the Top Techs is also going to cover the combat machine. So anything G&G makes is going to be covered under 90-day warranty if you bought it after September of 2012. If you have a Top Tech gun purchased before September, it's still covered for 2 years. Yeah, and I think that's going to cover the Top Tech versus the combat machine.
Hey, I forgot one last thing.
Oh,
I actually did forget. The Top Tech is actually the only gun in the airsoft market that allows this. If you take a look at it, as I'm selecting, going through the fire selector modes, the little button on the other side actually moves along.
That is true. I thought that VFC might have done that, but Frank, you corrected me earlier off camera that the Top Tech is pretty much the only gun, and G&G was the only company that bothered to put a gear and a cam and everything in there to make that thing move. So it just kind of is another testament to the realism of the Top Tech guns that not even doesn't feature on the combat machine, but not any other gun has it really.
No.
All right, well, that's going to cover the G&G Top Tech versus the combat machine. My name is Tim.
I'm Head Tech Frank.
Thanks for watching GITV.
All right, see you guys.